You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 343.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? As always, excited to be here. Welcome to April, and a big hello to all of my regular listeners. I'm so glad that you're here and regularly listening and downloading the show. Also, welcome to any new listeners. There's been a bump here recently in my downloads, and one of the reasons I think that might be happening is because I am actively growing my email list for my business. And a lot of times in my daily emails that I send out, I link to an episode of the show that is relevant to what I'm talking about related to cookbook writing. So many of you are maybe new here listening to the show or new on my email list. So I want to welcome you. And I also want to welcome anyone that has found me just because of ChatGPT or Google or however else you ran across this podcast and the work that we do here. I also want you to know that there are many listeners that listen to this show for a while that finally get up the courage to write their own cookbook, their own family cookbook, or a traditionally published cookbook. So those are two different types of books. One is for legacy, primarily preservation of memories and family recipes. And then one is for a business or for profit, and different publishing paths perhaps for those, but both highly valuable books. So if you're a listener and you're interested in writing a cookbook of your own, you are in the right place. In the show notes below, I have a checklist to the Art of Cookbook Creation. You're welcome to download that anytime. Walks you kind of step by step through the process of self-publishing a cookbook, and then also some tips about pro-publishing are thrown in as well. So feel free to download that to enjoy it. And I hope it gives you some inspiration and help that you might need if you're interested in publishing your own cookbook. So today on the show, I have an interview with Diane Morrisey. Diane is the founder of @Diane Morrisey on Instagram. She is known for her acute sense of humor and her encouragement and her easy and innovative recipes that come with a big side of "you got this." Diane is a former caterer and executive at Whole Foods, where she oversaw the prepared food business and operations for stores in New York and Connecticut. In other words, Diane knows what people want to eat and what they can cook in a short window that most of us have to get dinner on the table. Diane lives in Connecticut with her husband and whichever of her 6 children happen to be home for dinner. You've Got This is Diane's first cookbook, and today on the show we talk about the emotional side of feeding people and being fed, Diane's journey to writing her first cookbook that we're going to talk about today, and her tips for choosing what to cook for supper based on the mood the cook might be in. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Diane Morrisey. Hi, Diane. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
Yes, so excited that you're here. Talk all about your brand new book, You Got This. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm first and foremost, I'm a mom of 6. I'm a self-taught cook. And I learned from a really young age that food is a powerful way to express love and create connection. You know, in my house, food was always the center of everything. It was the epicenter of everything. It was the great uniter. And the kitchen in my parents' house was always the heartbeat of the house. And I grew up with my mom and my grandparents who immigrated from Italy. I grew up with my grandmother who lived with us in the house, and they were the most amazing cooking influences. So I learned I learned, about my love for food from them.
Yes, how amazing to be raised in a home where your grandmother lived. I'm not sure that many people are doing that anymore these days.
Probably not, and it's a shame. And oh boy, my to have one day back from back then, you take it for granted, you don't know, but uh when I think back of she cooked 24/7, Maggie, it was funny. And I just remember her, like, she had this big wooden board that she used to roll the cavatil and the gnocchi on, and how her fingers moved so deftly. And I just see it in my mind. And oh, to be able to see it in person
I
one more
know.
time, it just was something.
Amazing, amazing. So you learned from her. Who else was a big influence in your family for cooking?
Well, I mean, that's really it. I learned from her, and my mom is a sweet little Irish lass, and in order for her to marry my very Italian father, she had to learn how to cook Italian food. And
Uh-oh.
so my grandmother taught my mother first how to cook, and boy, my mom knew her way around a pot of Sunday sauce better than anybody towards the end. So just watching those two and how they fed their family is how I learned. I just watched and I observed.
Yes, yes. And you all celebrated with food, created connection with food, and
It was everything. And, their cooking made us feel secure. And that was always the feeling that I wanted to replicate with my own family, feeding and providing for my family and friends. It was always like a love letter
yeah.
to those that I love. And I learned that from my mom and my grandmother.
And I think it's interesting that you mentioned, and I read this in the introduction too, and you just said it here, that you wanted to replicate in your own kitchen an emotion more. And it wasn't really about replicating certain recipes, although I'm sure that came, but it was
No,
the way that it felt.
it was the way that it felt. It was the security that we felt like when we got off the bus and we ran into the house, and I'd say every day, Mom, what'd you make? And she always had something. It just, my dad was a Catholic high school basketball coach and teacher. And I'm one of six. He raised a family of eight on a very small salary. And my mother was a master at stretching that dollar. And we sat down to a wonderful dinner every night. And it was a salad. It was iceberg lettuce and a can of black olives, but we had that damn salad every night. And it was important. And it was the center of everything, what we ate and when we ate it, and the meals that my mom made. It just made me feel a certain way. And yeah, I wanted to replicate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I think that's neat because sometimes we talk about cookbooks and we might talk about recipes and we talk about the actual food itself, but sometimes we don't always get to the feeling that it evokes. And I think that that's an amazing way to start this conversation because I think it's threaded through everything that you have done here in the book. And I think also in your journey to where you are. So why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about beyond that, where you were, how you learned to cook. You said you were self-taught, but what happened to really form your food experiences outside of your immediate family?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I got married. I was an art major in college, and I studied graphic design. So I've always been very creative. And when I got married, I got married after college, and 9 months to the day, my first daughter, our first child, was born. And I didn't really know how to cook. I mean, I watched and had good teachers, but I didn't really know how to cook well. And the year I got married, Maggie, was the year that the Food Network came out. And back then, people may not remember. You would remember, I would think, that it was one half. I was 1994, and it was one half hour show after another. And I was sucked in like nobody's business. And when my babies slept, I watched the Food Network, and I learned. And then you were able to print out the recipes. How fabulous was that? So it was nirvana. And that's what I did. I watched those shows one after another, and I learned, and I swallowed all of those magazines, the cooking magazines, the Gourmet and the Bon Appetit, and I read all of the cookbooks I got for my bridal shower, and I just was voracious. And I taught myself how to cook, but I would say the Food Network was absolutely instrumental in that.
Yeah, it was an amazing revelation when that happened,
You
and how
remember?
things, yeah, yeah, how things have come along since then. And now what you're doing on Instagram, what we're doing in the cookbook space, I think a lot of what we've seen is as a result of that media space where we could watch cooking shows all day
No
long.
doubt about it. And then when I was raising my family, I started to cater. We started, having dinner parties, and I got pretty good at cooking. And so I started catering, and people asked me to cater parties. And that's how my catering business started. And that's when I got a sense for, presentation and fun flavors and displaying food. And, in that catering time, I used to travel to the one Whole Foods that was in Connecticut at the time, in Greenwich, like an hour away. And to get an obscure item at the time, like Israeli couscous, you couldn't find Israeli couscous anywhere. So I just, go to that store. And I remember standing in front of the prepared foods department, like the chef case, staring at how they displayed the food. It was just also beautiful to me. I think food is beautiful. And ironic years later how I actually went to work for Whole Foods and started running their prepared foods departments in New York and Connecticut. And then I got into store leadership and started running their ginormous New York City stores.
Yeah. And I do think you're right. I think those display cases at a store like Whole Foods are very aspirational for cooks and for people that want to cook or learn how to cook or learn how to put flavors together. Looking at those platters of food is inspiring.
It gives you ideas. It absolutely does. And later on, after I stared at them, like when I started working for them, I was the one setting those displays up. And, so I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew what people would love to see because I was that person.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what you learned from your time at Whole Foods that you've carried over not only to your cooking, but to your book today. What did you learn about people and shopping for ingredients and cooking?
Well, I mean, what didn't I learn? It was a tremendous education for me. First and foremost, it's a business. So I learned how to control the bottom line. And in the same token, I was doing that in my own home as well. Is that a cat?
That's my cat.
So funny. I got them all over.
He's so bad. He always has to come check things out when I'm
I can't
recording
believe
it.
I have a bunch of cats, and I can't believe I don't have any
Well,
of them near.
maybe they'll come in to meet Virgil here in a
Yeah.
minute.
So, boy, I mean, controlling costs, spending, wisely, purchasing wisely. To this day, I don't go to the grocery store without taking inventory first. And it's so funny when I say that, but it's true. I open up all my cabinets, I see what I have. I don't, because I'm very conscious of overspending and of waste and of making sure nothing gets, lost out. And so simple things like that, I keep things streamlined. I see if I open up my fridge, I said every night is a episode of Chopped in my house. For 30 years, every night's been an episode of Chopped. I look and see what I have and I figure out what to make from that,
Yeah.
and I've gotten really good at it. I should go on Chopped, to be honest with
You
you.
probably should go on Chopped. And I think it's something you said in your book is that the way you've organized the recipes is by mood.
It's true. And it's hard to explain. It was something my publisher and I went back and forth about. And it's how I raised my kids. Like I had 6 kids in 9 years. So I always had babies. And, it's like, ugh, what do you like? Oh, we all have the same thought. Oh my God, what are we cooking?
Do they need to eat again?
Oh, right. I just get them for breakfast. That should at least hold them over till tomorrow.
Exactly.
But no, that's not how that works. So, I loved putting out little displays and little dips and little things to dip in them and little bowls of things. And it was just a smorgasbord. And it's, one didn't like this, one like that. So I'd put it out and eat what you want, leave what you don't. So it was just always something like an idea. I let go of the idea of having to do a protein, a veg, and a starch. I didn't subscribe to that, and my kids turned out okay.
Yeah, it sounds like they did. So I think before you wrote your book, from what I read, you actually started posting on Instagram. So let's talk a little bit about that journey and then how that led into your book.
I use the term happy accident for that. So I was in New York City. I was commuting into New York every day. I was probably gone 16 hours a day. And one day I posted a birthday cake for my daughter, Frances. And it was just a cake. And the only reason why, Maggie, I got onto social media to begin with, Instagram specifically, was to spy on my 6 children. Make no mistake, the only reason why I was on Instagram, to spy on them. And one day I posted this birthday cake for my daughter, Frances, and my kids are like, Mom, it got a lot of likes. And I'm like, what's a like? I didn't even know what a like was. They're like, Mom, that's getting a lot of attention. Now you see my follower counts going up. I'm like, what the heck is this? So I said, all right, let me do it again. So a few days later, I posted something else and I got the same reaction. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just started posting food, and I was still commuting into New York, working for Whole Foods, and it just sort of took off. And then before you knew it, I had 25,000 followers. And one day my account was hacked and it just went away. And those 25,000 followers were gone.
Yeah.
And every single one of that, I think there were maybe at the time 1,500 posts, all gone. And I was done. I was like, I am done with this. I was so deflated. Nobody would help you out in the Silicon Valley. And so I said to my kids, I'm done. That was fun. That was fun, kids, but I'm done. And they said, Mom, you can't be done. You love doing this. And they were right. I did, but I didn't have the heart to start again. And the only thing I said to myself was, what will it show my kids if I just give up and quit? How that will be a terrible, lesson to them. So I started again, and I didn't have the heart, but I did it to be an example for them. And that was the only reason, because trust me, I didn't want to start again. And I did. And that's when it took off.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have successfully built that up, have an engaged following, people who you communicate with. And it seems, from what I read, there was someone who was in your DMs asking you about this cookbook.
Well, over the years, I'd gotten a lot of people reaching out. There's Oliver.
Oh, there's your kid.
A lot of people reaching out, asking. And of course, as your followers grow, you get people reaching out and, are you writing a book? Are you writing a book? Can we work with you? And I sort of looked at all of these people and did my little vetting process. And to be honest with you, Maggie, I didn't even know what the heck I was looking for. But I've always relied on my instincts, and I've always thought, I've always relied on my instincts, and it never felt right. One day I got a DM from somebody, and the message didn't intrigue me. What intrigued me was that the DM, the Instagram handle was Tate George. Now, if you know college basketball, like, we're huge college basketball fans, and Tate George was a tremendous player for UConn the year I met my husband, and they did an NCAA run that year. So I'm like, hey, George, this person's got to be a UConn fan. I love that. So that's when I reached out. I responded back to them. The next day we spoke on the phone for about 2 hours, and I quickly learned who this person was. And in the middle of the conversation, she said to me, Diane, she was a literary agent. She said, I really don't do cookbooks. I have a lot of other very high profile clients, but I don't really do cookbooks. I have one other cookbook client, and I'd love for you to be my second. And I go, do you mind me asking who your cookbook client is? And she said, Ina Garden.
Oh.
And I nearly fell over because if you know me,
yes, the Barefoot
I
Princess.
adore Ina.
Yes.
I have every single one of her books, and Esther Newberg is my literary agent, and that is Ina's literary agent. And when she said that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah.
Remember I told you I'd been waiting, but I didn't know what the hell I was waiting for.
Yeah.
I was waiting for Esther.
Yes. Well, there she is. Esther showed up, made you an offer you couldn't refuse, and now you have a published book out. What was the timeline, and how long have you been working on the book?
It was like 2 years. So she said, you're going to work with me. I'm going to be your agent. You're going to write a book proposal. And I go, what the hell is that? And she, helped me with that process because again, you don't know what you don't know. And this was bizarre, new to me. So she guided me to write this book proposal. And she took that book proposal and put it in front of a lot of publishers. And that's how I ended up with Simon and Schuster. And it's been really wonderful. And it was about 2 years. And at the time, I was like, 2 years, Jesus, why is it taking me? But now I understand because it is such a huge process and all the moving parts and all the people involved. And I will say one thing in that process, at one point, somebody had a conversation with me and they told me about the photo shoots in Brooklyn. We did our photo shoots, 3 of them in Brooklyn. And I said, okay, so like the food, that's when I learned that I wasn't cooking it. I'm like, what do you mean I'm not cooking it? No, Diane, you need to hire a food stylist. And I'm like, well, no, I'm cooking the food. So that was funny. It was all aha moments to me, the entire process, but about 2 years, start to finish.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And I would like to talk a little bit about the book and some of the chapters and some of the things in the book and your overarching subtitle, which is Recipes Anyone Can Make and Everyone Will Love. I think you set a wide swath of people for this book. So talk about your philosophy about that, because this isn't just specifically for like a certain type of cook or a certain type of eater. You really went after a lot of people, which I think is great. So tell us about your concept for the book, and let's talk a little bit about some of the chapters in the book.
I learned really quickly as my followers grew who my follower was. I've always been very aware of my demographic and who follows me and why they follow me because I communicate. I really do have a pretty strong relationship with my followers. And that engagement, I think, is why my account has grown so quickly because I engage and I communicate. And if you send me a message, I'm going to send you one back.
Yeah.
So I learned really fast that my follower, I grew up with strong cooking influences, but I just always assumed everybody did. I learned really quickly that not everybody did. And people didn't have the mom or the grandmom, and they grew up with no cooking influences. And now they're married or they have children or they're starting a family or they're on their own and they want to create memories, but they don't have any blueprint to follow. So I kind of wrote it with them in mind. I have a young demographic. So a lot of college students, newly graduated, who are in their apartment for the first time. But then I have experienced cooks. So I knew I had to run the gamut. The title, You Got This, came from my dad being a coach. I was a coach. I always played athletics growing up. I was a teacher at one point. I was an art teacher. I taught all my children. And in all of my communications with, thousands of messages a day, I'd always end up half of them saying, you got this. I always felt like I was motivating people and giving them being an enthusiastic teacher to say, you got this, because they lacked the confidence themselves. So to me, it was a natural title because that's what I do. I motivate and I inspire through my enthusiasm about food. So I wanted to come across as that kind of you got this mantra, with the title.
Yeah. And I think that if recipes anyone can make, I mean, I think that any cook that saw the front of this book would really be inspired by that. And the second thing then is that things that everybody's going to love. And I think that's important for people that take the time to have the ingredients, spend the time in the kitchen, that they're going to create things that are going to taste good and people are going to enjoy.
I will say this also, Maggie, we all know the recipe that you look at the recipe and then you look at the ingredients and there are 35 ingredients. You can't pronounce half of them. And the other half, you wouldn't even know where to source them from. So I always had a little tagline in my bio that said real food for real people. Like, if you're coming home on a Wednesday night and you have a family to feed and you have an hour to do it before you got to take off and go to hockey practice or to go visit your mother or whatever, you have a very limited time to feed people or to feed yourself. And, so you're not going to cook those recipes on a random Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. You need something that's going to be delicious, that you probably have stuff in the pantry to make, real food that real people are going to cook on a Wednesday night.
Yes. Yes. So what kinds of things did your audience respond to the best when it came to recipes that you presented them?
I will tell you, I mean, I have thousands and thousands and thousands of recipes posted, but I think that the one that always strikes nerve with all of my people are the nostalgic recipes.
Mm.
And I find that so fascinating and so heartwarming. And I mean, I could have 4,000 comments on one particular recipe for a chicken divan or a chicken casserole, or you know what I'm saying? Something really nostalgic. Boy, that just really tugs at people's heartstrings. And I love it because I learned that very quickly. But that is sort of my MO. I cook very nostalgically because food means something to me. And a lot of food evokes so many memories. And so I love being a part of that.
Yeah, and you have everything from lasagna, meatloaf, spicy butter shrimp. The recipe that really stuck out and kind of made me laugh when I read it was the cod sticks with the bang bang sauce. Growing up in a large family myself, I always thought, I mean, fish sticks. We ate fish sticks like all the time.
Yeah, but you with the yellow, the fisherman.
Yes, yes,
Gorton.
yes.
As did we.
Yes.
We did the same. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's neat. And of course, the bang bang sauce, something that's popular with bang bang shrimp. And so all these things in the dinner time chapter, what set the dinner time chapter apart from some of the other chapters for vegetables or bowls?
You know, again, I've always been sort of loosey-goosey when it comes to feeding my own family randomly in the middle of the week. But, you know, if you're having company over, you might have a more substantial dinner than if you weren't having company over. Weekends, I tend to make a roast, or like we'll grill steaks as opposed to a bowl of pasta. So, you know, I suppose I cook for the, you know, depending on who's going to be at my house and what day of the week it is. There's a recipe in there. I think it's probably my favorite recipe because it's so nostalgic, for my grandmother's brajol. And that's, you know, it takes a lot of time to put that dish together and then to braise it for it to be done. So that is absolutely a weekend dish. You're not making brajol on a Tuesday.
Right. You have a neat chapter called Almost Dinner where you talk about fritters, galettes, pizza dough, dip it, puff me up, and bake to a crisp. So tell us about that, because you have a way of presenting the information within each of those sections.
You know, if you follow me on Instagram, you know darn well, and I don't have a brand deal with them, but I should. Puff pastry is my best friend. And I never has there been an ingredient ever in the history of the world, in my world, that makes you look like a rock star, like puff pastry. And you don't have to do a whole hell of a lot to it. And so I cook with it a lot. I make really creative, fabulous, simple dishes with it. And I encourage everybody to put 1 or 2 boxes in their freezer because it makes you look like a rock star. So, you know, simple thing, 3 things that you can make with puff pastry. Pizza dough, I'm a huge fan of. In fact, not even kidding you, I have 2 pizza doughs warming to room temp on my counter right now because I'm going to make a corned beef and cabbage pizza with my leftovers tonight for my son Patrick. Pizza dough is something you should always have in your house because it's so easy to put together and make so many different things using.
Yep.
Fritters, I'm a vegetarian, so I love making fritters, and I love condiments. So making a batch of fritters with a fabulous little sauce is totally my jam.
Yeah. And then the galettes.
I mean, again, it's the same thing. It's a pizza dough. Listen, and I'm not going to judge people. I often use a pizza dough that I got at the grocery store as well, but it's really simple to make your own dough, store them in the freezer, and then pull them out, let them set at room temp, and make a fabulous galette. Pies intimidate me. Erin McDowell is a friend of mine, and she's an incredible pie maker, but pies scare me. I can make them, but it's like my anxiety gets high, my ADHD, I'm like, oh, I make a galette. It's free form, it's rustic. I don't have that anxiety. So I'm a huge believer in savory and sweet galettes.
Yeah, neat. And something you also mentioned is that a lot of times you'll make a bigger, like entree size portion of a vegetable forward dish and then cook maybe a flank steak or a pork tenderloin or some chicken legs on the side. And then that appeals to people in the house who are meat eaters or not.
I have to think that way because I haven't eaten meat myself in 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm pescatarian. I do love seafood. Our oldest daughter is a vegetarian, so we always had a mixed palate. I married an Irishman, a meat and potato guy, and the rest of my kids are carnivores. So I've always had to please a lot of people. So yes, that's one thing that I've always done. Like my favorite vegetable is broccoli rabe. I have it in the book. So I'll meal prep a bunch of broccoli rabe at the beginning of the week, and I'll make a big batch and I'll eat it myself. I'll maybe, make some orzo or couscous to go with it. And then I'll cook some, I'll grill some steaks or chicken for my family and everybody is pleased.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip. So a
Yeah.
couple of desserts that I saw that I have to ask you about. The first is the chocolate root beer cake.
So good.
It looks good.
Oh, it's so good. And people will say, do you taste the root beer? You don't taste the root beer, but that root beer does something to waken that cake up. And of course it's smothered in ganache and it's just a fabulous cake. And quite frankly, it's in a bundt pan.
Yeah.
I think any bundt cake is beautiful.
Yeah.
So that my publisher made that for a party that I made over the holidays that she went to. And she said, Diane, that was so good. I go, I told you it was so good.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful photo. And tell us about the chocolate chips.
All right. Now I thought about like, am I putting this in? It's not even a recipe. It's something so simple, but I've got to tell you, Maggie, when I make them at my house or if I have people over and I put out a big platter of chocolate chips, it is the first thing to go. People don't make them. They've never made them, but they're like, what the heck? You just literally dipped a wavy chip into decadent melted chocolate, let it set, and then sprinkle it with some Malden salt. And it's the simplest thing, but it's fabulous.
Yeah, it's got the salty sweet thing going
Ugh.
on. Yes. All right. Well, one last thing. If someone's going to buy your book, cook from your book, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the puff pastry, pizza dough, maybe even if it's pie dough that you buy pre-made to make these things, to make your fritters. But what about the pantry? Like, what are some things that you think really take a pantry to like the level where you have some things that are not only flavorful, easy to store, but just like really add flavor and some,
Are we talking about freezer, refrigerator?
Yeah, let's talk about the freezer and the refrigerator.
So, and I have a section at the beginning of my book for, setting yourself up for success and, staples in your fridge, staples in your pantry. And it's funny, a majority of my followers came during COVID when people were home cooking out of their pantry. And, I relied heavily on my pantry, as did so many people. So, and I say you don't have to have a full pantry at the very beginning, but you sort of work into it and you lead up to it and you buy a little bit at a time until you have a good inventory. But I love vinegars, I love condiments, I love oils. Of course, there's a cooking oil and there's a finishing oil, and we talk about that. And I don't eat meat. So a big source of my protein has always been canned beans. And quite frankly, they're very economical as well. So you can do so much with canned beans as either a main or a side. Grains, I love grains. And because I don't eat meat and I'm a huge meal prepper, I make a big batch of a grain, 1 or 2 a week. So I always have farro, I have barley, I have wheat berries, couscous, grains in your fridge to be able to cook on their own. You can make a fritter with that. You can pump up a salad with that. There's so many different wonderful things. You can add them to soups that you can use a grain for. Nuts and seeds, lots of different pastas, canned basics, certain canned basics, artichokes. Do you have artichokes? If you don't, you should have artichokes.
Yeah.
There were so many coconut milk. There were so many things that you should have. And if you have them, it's just going to make putting together a last minute meal so much easier because you can grab from what you already have.
Yeah, it's true. You have a beautiful section called Your House Salad. It has, gosh, it looks like 8 different columns, everything from the greens, the protein, the grains, the legume, fruit, dressing, and then some miscellaneous toppings. And I bet if you use this table or chart, you probably could make,
Well,
so many different types and combinations.
Salads, I always have a cool salad. And whenever I post a salad, inevitably I'll get hundreds of messages saying, I would have never thought of that. So that's where that chart came from, because I sort of spell it out. If you sort of throw one of each of these columns into a bowl, you're going to have a fabulous salad. But a lot of them people wouldn't have ever thought about. So I actually also made that with my kids in mind, because they were all salad eaters, but they would never have thought about half of that stuff. So of the few of them that are living on their own, they're like, Mom, I open that chapter to that salad thing almost every night, and I love hearing that.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about you and cookbooks. Cookbooks, something that you grew up with, or I know you loved Ina.
I wish you could see. My husband is a builder, and he built a huge bookshelf in my kitchen with cookbooks. I have about 500 cookbooks, and I rotate them on the shelf in my kitchen. Not almost as big as what you have behind you.
Yeah, and that's my thing, my cookbook.
I love that. Yeah. Anyway, so and I rotate them. And, a lot of the books on my shelf right now are nostalgic. I mean, I have cookbooks that I got from my bridal shower that I cooked from. I have cookbooks that I have my very first cookbook my sister ever bought for me when I was 18 years old is still on that shelf. So they're nostalgic. And what I love about my cookbooks is that they're all used, Maggie. They're dilapidated and falling apart, and I write notes in them, and I earmark the pages. So I always say, God willing, one of my kids will get my cookbooks if they want them. And it's sort of a roadmap of what Mom did, because I'm all over the pages. I write in them and highlight, and they're used and they're loved.
That's great.
I love my cookbooks.
That's great. Would you be willing to share, as we're wrapping up, a few or your favorite cookbooks?
Oh, yeah. Beside mine?
Yes, besides yours. Although yours will be linked, so everybody.
I'm kidding.
I think it's wonderful. I think that we as cookbook writers have to love our own books. So I think yours should be at the top of the list.
I got married in 1993, and on my bridal shower, I got the Silver Palette cookbooks. I got the Silver Palette cookbook and the Silver Palette Good Times. And my very first dinner party that I had when I got back from my honeymoon, and I had a dinner party. It was 6 people, and I had to take a day off of work, and it was 6 people. And I got the menu from the Silver Palette cookbook, and I remember crying and swearing, and I had to take the day off of work. I could make that meal probably in about 20 minutes now. But so my friends are like, you remember what you cooked 31 years ago? I go, you better believe I do. But the Silver Palette cookbooks are so nostalgic to me. And I cooked my way through them when I was teaching myself how to cook. So they're absolutely up there. And then I think the other one that I would say is, because I'm such a huge fan of Ina Garten, the very first cookbook she ever came out with in 1999, I remember my brother gave it to me for my birthday in 1999, and it was the Barefoot Contessa cookbook. And it's the only one of her books that she's not on the cover. Yeah. It's, I think, a potato salad, like a niçoise salad maybe, or something. I'm not even sure. But that cookbook, because it was like when I catered, I used her books. That was my blueprint, all of her books. And so I would say absolutely Ina's first book.
Yeah, I think it is fascinating. I didn't really realize that and now that I think about it, that the first book she wrote, she wasn't on the cover of it.
I'm going to be honest with you. That's sort of one of the reasons that I didn't put my picture on mine.
Yeah.
because Ina didn't, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Literally, I thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're trying to inspire people to cook with these recipes that anyone can make and everyone will love. And that's kind of like the star of the show. Ina, but you have a ton of followers, Diane. I mean, you probably could have, but maybe she was different because she was on television.
No, she had her show had just come out, so she did already have quite a following in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. I hadn't really put those together. Okay. So I'll link to those in the show notes, both great books. I pulled Silver Palette out sometime during the winter because I wanted to make the chicken Marabella with the olives and the prunes and chicken thighs. And so good.
I never got into that recipe.
Yeah, you weren't. If you're not a meat eater, you probably wouldn't have.
No, but my sister was. And Ina redid it years later in one of her books. She did a chicken Marbella. But my whole family is hooked on that recipe.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what you have planned this month with your book.
I am going to visit a lot of different cities and meet a lot of my followers, which I am so thrilled about. I'm actually going to go to LA for the very first time. I've never been to Los Angeles, and I have an event there, a couple of events there. And so I'm basically just going to be going around the country, meeting a lot of my followers and signing books.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And where can people tune in to find out where you're going to be?
On my Instagram page, Diane Morrisey. Diane Morrisey is my Instagram page, and I have a little section set up for Cookbook Tour.
Very good. I will link to that also in the show notes. Well, Diane, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, telling us all about your brand new book, You Got This. I'm excited to dive into cooking some of the recipes here, and you've certainly given us all a lot to think about and to love about your cookbook.
Thank you, Maggie. It was absolutely a pleasure. Talking about food is my favorite pastime, so I've enjoyed our time today talking about food.
Yes, I have too. Well, have a great time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green. And until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.